The bakery glowed like a pocket of warmth carved out of the icy morning, golden lights reflecting off glass cases stacked with soft bread and glossy pastries. But the boy didn't see the beauty, he only saw survival. His small body shivered as he stepped closer to the counter, snow melting off his bare feet and pooling around his toes. His breath came out in thin, frightened clouds as he tried to steady himself, rehearsing the words he had whispered to himself all night. The sweet smell of cinnamon rolls felt cruel, like the world teasing him. The clerk looked up, expecting a customer, then froze. The boy's clothes were threadbare, patched and fraying at the sleeves, and his cheeks were flushed not from warmth but from biting cold. His eyes, too, big for his thin face, darted toward the shelves before he forced himself to meet her stare. He swallowed, lips trembling, and asked in a voice barely more than a quiver if they had any old bread, anything expired, anything no one wanted. He tried to smile to make the question lighter, but it only made the moment heavier. His voice cracked when he explained that his mommy hadn't eaten, that she was sick from hunger, that he didn't mind if the bread tasted bad. The words broke out of him like something sharp he'd been holding in. The clerk's grip on the counter tightened. Guilt washed over her, because she didn't know what to do with a sentence like that. The bakery's warm light suddenly felt too bright, exposing his desperation like a wound. The boy lowered his gaze, afraid he had asked for too much, afraid he'd be turned away, afraid he'd have to go, back home with nothing but the silence of his mother, trying not to cry when he returned, empty-handed again. Outside, a swirl of snow pressed against the window, as if the winter itself were waiting to swallow him the second he stepped back out. He didn't want to leave. He didn't want to fail her one more time. So he stood there, small and shaking, hoping this warm little bakery might save them. Even with something as simple as expired bread, a sudden blast of icy air swept through the bakery as the door swung open, rustling garlands and making the warm lights flicker. Snowflakes spiraled inside before melting on the tiles, and everyone turned instinctively toward the entrance. The boy didn't move, only tightened his fists at his sides, as if afraid the world was about to push him out. A tall man stepped in, framed by the cold blue glow of the snowy street behind him. His coat was sharp, his expression carved with the kind of confidence that filled a room without trying. But he wasn't alone. Perched on his arm was a tiny girl bundled in a red winter jacket. Cheeks rosy, eyes curious and bright. She clung to a half-eaten pastry, crumbs dusting her mittens as she leaned her head on her father's shoulder. The CEO paused the moment he heard the boy's voice lingering in the air. Soft, desperate, shaking. He didn't look away or pretend he hadn't heard. Something subtle shifted in his posture, like a wall inside him had suddenly cracked. He stood still, letting the bakery door close slowly behind him, letting the warmth swallow him, while his gaze stayed fixed on the child at the counter. His daughter tugged lightly at his coat collar, sensing something was different. She followed his eyes to the boy, her small face tightening with innocent concern. "Daddy," she whispered, almost afraid to disturb the quiet ache hanging in the air. He said. Her little voice wasn't loud, but it struck him harder than anything she'd ever said. He exhaled slowly, a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. The bakery felt too quiet now. The soft Christmas music, the glow of the holiday lights, the coziness, it all clashed with the stark truth, standing barefoot on the cold floor. The CEO's jaw clenched, memories stirring, moments of hunger he had buried deep, moments he never spoke about, moments he thought he had outgrown. But the boy didn't look back. He didn't even notice them enter. He was too focused on the single loaf behind the glass, too lost in the fear of being turned away again. And the CEO, holding his daughter closer, felt a kind of urgency building in his chest. A pull that told him this wasn't a moment he could walk past. Not this time. Not this boy. The boy's small finger hovered over the glass, pointing at the loaf as if it were something precious enough to save a life. His voice was barely audible now, worn thin by hope and fear mixing too fast inside his chest. The clerk swallowed hard and forced her hands to move, rummaging beneath the counter where they usually kept day-old rejects. The boy leaned forward on his toes, breath trembling, his heart pounding so loudly he could almost hear it. He wasn't asking for much, just something to carry home so his mom wouldn't go, another night pretending she wasn't starving. But the clerk's search grew slower, more frantic, and when she finally straightened, her eyes were filled with apology. "Sweetheart, we don't even have expired leftovers today." Her voice was soft, broken as though the truth hurt her too. The boy froze. For a heartbeat, he didn't blink. The words didn't make sense at first. They hit him in delayed waves. No leftovers. Nothing free. Nothing worthless enough to give away. He nodded once too quickly, the kind of nod that tried to hide heartbreak but failed instantly. His lips parted like he wanted to speak, to say it's okay, but no sound came out. His throat was too tight. He stepped back, shoulders shrinking inward as if he were folding up, trying to make himself small enough that the disappointment wouldn't crush him. The warm lights of the bakery blurred as hot tears welled, but he blinked them away fiercely. He had promised himself he wouldn't cry in front of strangers. Not again, not when he needed to be strong for his mom. The cold air seeped in from the door behind him, brushing his bare feet like a warning. Go home with nothing. Face her empty smile again. He could almost see her in his mind, thin, pale, pretending she wasn't hungry just to let him sleep. The guilt stabbed deeper than any winter chill. He turned slightly, preparing to leave, each movement heavy and reluctant, as if the warm bakery floor were trying to hold him in place a little longer. The clerk reached out helplessly, but no words came. Behind the boy, the CEO watched with a stillness that wasn't cold. It was controlled, strained, as if he were restraining something rising too quickly inside him. Something old, something painful, something that wouldn't let him look away from the child standing alone, defeated in the glow of Christmas lights. The boy didn't make it. More than 2 steps before a soft thud rolled across the bakery floor. A tiny pastry, golden warm, half-eaten, skittered to a stop right beside his bare foot. The boy looked down, startled, unsure if he was allowed to touch something that didn't belong to him. The bakery lights reflected off the sugar crystals on the pastry, turning it into something that looked impossibly kind. He lifted his eyes, slowly, and found the little girl, staring at him from her father's arms. Her mittened hand was still stretched toward him, as if she'd pushed the pastry away on purpose. Her face held none of the fear adults carried, only simple, instinctive compassion. She wiggled her fingers again and said, one word with a seriousness far too big for her tiny voice. Share. The boy's breath caught. He didn't know what to do with a gesture like that. No one had offered him anything in a long time, not without conditions, not without pity. He blinked, confused, overwhelmed, torn between gratitude and guilt. His fingers twitched as if they wanted to reach for it, but his feet stayed frozen to the tile. The CEO stepped closer, his polished shoes clicking softly, each step deliberate, controlled. His daughter clung to his coat, proud of what she'd done, but unaware of the ripple it created in him. He saw the boy's hesitation, the tension tightening his small shoulders, the way kindness seemed to frighten him more than the cold, and something inside the man twisted painfully. He crouched beside his daughter, lowering himself to the boy's height. The movement slower than usual, not out of caution, but out of a strange reverence. His face softened as he studied the boy's trembling stance, his red ears, the hunger buried in his eyes. The CEO knew that look. He had worn it once, a lifetime ago, but never forgotten. Still, he didn't speak. Not yet. Words felt too heavy, too likely to shatter the fragile moment. Instead, he waited, letting the warmth of the bakery and the innocence of his daughter's gesture fill the space between them. The boy's breathing hitched, his gaze flicking between the pastry, the little girl, and the tall man who suddenly seemed less intimidating and more human. For a second, the world held its breath with them, snow falling silently outside, garlands glowing gently above, the quiet hum of Christmas pressing in like a warm blanket. And in that suspended moment, the boy felt something he hadn't in a long time, that maybe he wasn't invisible after all. The CEO finally let out a slow breath, as though the decision forming inside him had been waiting there for years. He lowered his daughter gently to the floor, keeping one steadying hand on her small shoulder. Then he rose, not in the cold, corporate way people expected from him, but with a quiet resolve that softened the sharp lines of his face. The boy stiffened as the man approached, like a stray unsure whether a hand meant comfort or danger. The CEO crouched again, this time directly in front of him, his voice low and steady but carrying a weight that made the room fall silent. He told the boy softly that expired bread wasn't good enough for a mother who had gone hungry for days, that no mother should suffer through an empty stomach while pretending she wasn't hurting. That breakfast wasn't supposed to be something you begged for. Each word seemed to sink into the boy's trembling heart, melting fear and disbelief all at once. The CEO stood and placed his sleek black card on the counter with a firmness that made the clerk flinch. He ordered fresh loaves, warm, fragrant, stacked with care, pastries, soup, anything that would bring life back into a starving home. The clerk moved quickly, packing everything, her eyes glassy with relief and something like gratitude for the man who stepped in when she couldn't. The boy watched the bags fill, unable to move, unable to speak. His chest rose and fell in shallow breaths, as if he was afraid this kindness might evaporate if he blinked too hard. When the clerk pushed the heavy bags toward him, he didn't reach out right away. His hands hovered in the air, shaking, overwhelmed by the weight of generosity he'd never expected. The CEO's daughter reached him first, placing her tiny mittened hand over his. A silent signal, a small reassurance, a child's way of saying he was allowed to receive goodness too. He finally wrapped his fingers around the bags, clutching them to his chest like treasures he was terrified to lose. The CEO lifted his daughter back into his arms as she grinned, proud and bright, her eyes shining like she had changed the world, and in a way she had. The man felt it, something warm and unfamiliar weaving through. The space's success had hardened long, ego, kindness, purpose, a reminder of who he once hoped to be. As the boy turned toward the door, stepping out into the winter with food that could save his mother, the CEO watched him go. Snow whirled around the boy like a soft blessing, and the warm lights of the bakery glowed behind him. For the first time in years, the CEO felt something powerful and grounding settle inside him. Because in that small bakery on a cold winter morning he hadn't closed a deal. He'd opened a heart,